Okay, so in this series, we've discussed the Valar and the Maiar, but today let's talk about a group that's a little bit more familiar and a little bit more down to earth, the Elves. The Elves were the first beings created by Eru Ilúvatar, who was the supreme creator of Arda, which is Earth. So they were often referred to as the firstborn, predating humans and even before the sun and the moon were created. The Elves first awoke at Cuivianen, a starlit bay near the sea. The Valar were quite impressed and fond of the Elves. They observed their talent and recognized the potential of the Elves. The unfortunate bit is they were born when the world was under the shadow of Melkor, who we all know is the prime malevolent Vala who sought to rule over Middle-earth. So concerned with the safety of the Elves, the Valar, who were the divine guardians of the world, decided to summon the Elves to Aman, the Undying Lands, where they could live in peace. In fact, thousands of years later, in the Fellowship of the Ring, when Galadriel resists the temptation of the One Ring and says she will go west, this is the place she's referring to. So, when the Valar summoned the Elves to safety, it became known as the Great Journey. But not all of the Elves chose to leave, and as a result, the Elves were divided into 3 groups based on their willingness to travel and their loyalty to the Valar. The first group was called the Vanyar. These were the fairest and most devoted to the Valar. These were the Elves that didn't need to be asked twice. They were all heels and elbows, and when they arrived in Aman, they remained there. The second group was the Noldor. These were the Elves skilled in crafts and lore, and they went to Aman, but later returned to Middle-earth to reclaim their lost treasures and lands. Galadriel was a Noldor. This always surprised me because I always thought she had real Vanyar vibes. Feanor was also a Noldor elf, and you may remember that he was the highly skilled elf who crafted the Silmarils that would eventually be stolen by Melkor. And the third group was the Teleri. This was the largest group. Some went to Aman, but a lot stayed back in Middle-earth, and they were called the Sindar. Now, living in Middle-earth under the shadow of Morgoth required the Sindar to develop significant martial skills. They were accomplished archers and swordsmen, which is reflected in Legolas, who is also a Sinda. Peter Jackson's goal when making the Lord of the Rings trilogy was to stick as close to the source material as practical cerns would allow, and the Elves were one of the elements that Jackson brought to life beautifully. If you've read the books, you may know that Tolkien described the Elves as graceful and strong with keener senses than humans. Okay, fair enough, but what does that actually look like? How do you show that on screen? Well, Jackson managed it beautifully with what is now known as the show don't tell principle. Instead of explicitly saying that the Elves are highly disciplined and masters of their crafts, we see scenes where you see lines of Elves working in utter precision together. There's even a scene that illustrates this so perfectly where a line of elf soldiers lift their swords in unison and you get this as one sword after the other is lifted, and you immediately understand that you're dealing with highly trained experts. So how did they bring all of this to life? Weta Workshop's work on the Elves in the Lord of the Rings trilogy was a monumental achievement in design and craftsmanship. Their goal was to bring Tolkien's vision of the Elves to life, ancient beings of immense beauty and grace and wisdom, while still giving them a distinct identity that fit seamlessly into Middle-earth. Weta's artists drew heavily from nature and classical art to reflect the Elves' deep connection with their environment. The flowing shape of the leaves and vines inspired much of their costume and armor designs. The Elves' attire was created to emphasize their ethereal quality with long flowing robes, intricate embroidery, and delicate details. Even the architecture of Rivendell and Lothlorien mirrored their elegant, organic style. Weta Workshops crafted lightweight yet functional armor for the elven warriors, such as those seen in the prologue battle against Sauron. The armor blended intricate leaf-like motifs with a sleek design that emphasized their agility and skill. Even the elven blades, like Arwen's sword, Hadafang, and the daggers of Legolas were designed to be elegant yet deadly. Custom prosthetics like ear tips were designed to give actors their distinct elven features. Now, while pointed ears were never explicitly described by Tolkien, I reckon he would approve of the addition. Up until Lord of the Rings, elves were usually depicted as tiny childlike creatures. Tolkien, partially inspired by Norse mythology, portrayed elves as the tall, graceful beings we are familiar with today, but it's those pointed ears that let the audience go, ah, an elf. The actors worked with movement coaches to ensure the elves carried themselves with a unique, otherworldly grace. From their posture to their combat style, everything was designed to make them seem superior in skill and refinement compared to men. In fact, when you see soldiers in battle, you can usually tell, oh, that's an army of men versus, oh, that's an army of elves. Most of us can agree that the Peter Jackson trilogy did justice to Tolkien's story, and while much of the success of the trilogy is because the actors that were chosen for the role and the artistry of the people of the Weta Workshop, all of these elements are allowed to shine because when you come down to it, this project was handed to a fan. Peter Jackson read the stories and understood the characters when he was still a teen, well before his time as an accomplished director. He understood and loved the story from a perspective of a fan first. Who better to understand what the audience wants to see than a fan? In this age where so many stories are trying to be made new again, imagine what they could accomplish if they handed the reins over to a director who was a fan first. What kind of content would we have then? Thanks for watching.